combine the small payroll strategies around player development and under-the-radar player acquisitions with the big money payroll that allows him to retain players on long-term contracts. The Dodgers playbook is the general strategy that Stearns will be asked to replicate in New York. Team owner Steve Cohen has shown a willingness to spend lavishly on payroll. But in 2023, Cohen's big spending by Lindsey Adler-David Stearns will leave baseball operations for the Mets. Rodgers faces long recovery. The 39-year-old quarterback suffered a knuckle and but doctors say it shouldn't stop him from playing next year if he wants to. Aaron Rodgers was just a few minutes into his career as a New York Jet when he suffered one of the cruelest injuries in professional sports, a torn Achilles tendon. He's done for the season before he ever completed a pass for his new club. But what about the rest of his career? The 39-year-old was already testing the limits of age in a notoriously brutal sport as he attempted to follow Tom Brady's unprecedented path of longevity. Now, Rodgers faces a long road to recovery from an injury that has ended careers far shorter than his. Doctors who specialize in sports medicine say the recovery after surgery for an Achilles tear can take nearly a year, and that it can take another year after that for athletes to return to full strength or as close as they'll ever get to that. Those doctors also caution that not every pro athlete who suffers such an injury makes it back onto the field at all. Still, they were optimistic that should Rodgers wish to continue his career as a 40-year-old in 2024, his Achilles shouldn't stop him. I would anticipate that he should be able to come back next year, said Dr. Peter DeLuca, the chair of sports medicine at Cooperman-Barnabas Medical Center and a former Philadelphia Eagles physician. I don't think it's going to affect his throwing and arm strength, but I think it's going to affect his running a little bit, at least the first year back. Rodgers has yet to comment publicly since the injury beyond an Instagram post in which he said he's heartbroken, though before by Andrew Beaton and Louise Radnofsky some external factors such as the pandemic, but eventually returned as one of the NBA's best players. The more worrisome comparison for Rodgers is Kobe Bryant, who was 34 years old and nearing the end of his career when he tore his Achilles. He returned to the court, but he was never the same player. There have also been remarkable turnarounds that count as medical marvels. A Russian gymnast who seemingly anchored his team to an Olympic gold medal in Tokyo in the summer of 2021, 3 months after his injury and surgery, remains to American experts difficult to believe. Rams running back Cam Akers returned in under 6 months for the team's Super Bowl run 2 seasons ago, although he wasn't especially effective when he first got back onto the field. Despite the bittersweet situation on Monday night, when Rodgers and Jets fans saw the team's Super Bowl chances plummet even after the team pulled off an overtime victory in his absence, experts pointed to a couple silver linings. For one, when right-handed quarterbacks draw back to pass, they typically plant with their leg on the same side. Rodgers, though, tore his left Achilles tendon. The position he plays is also a positive factor. Unlike an NFL wide receiver or an NBA shooting guard, Rodgers doesn't require bursts of athleticism to be a master at his craft. Doctors are in agreement that his recovery will be more difficult owing to the simple fact that he's 39 years old. That may be relatively young for the general population, but it also makes him one of the oldest players in the NFL. Trying to get your muscle unit to come back is probably harder every year of your life, said Dr. Andrew Elliott, a foot and ankle surgeon at the Hospital for Special Surgery who works with Major League Soccer's New York Red Bulls. He's not 30. He's almost 40. Part of what makes predicting a precise outcome is that there isn't a terribly large sample size of NFL quarterbacks who have suffered an Achilles tear. And even some of the prominent examples that exist occurred decades ago, and doctors say medical advancements since then are significant. One prominent instance was another one of the best quarterbacks ever. Dolphins great Dan Marino tore his Achilles during the team's 5th game of the year in 1993, and when he first returned in the 1994 preseason he struggled, leading to questions about whether the injury would doom his career. Marino has said the surgery didn't work properly and that he didn't move the way he had previously, but when the regular season came around he proved his doubters wrong. He threw 5 touchdowns in the season opener to beat the New England Patriots. Jets fans don't need to be reminded of a slightly more recent Achilles tear. Vinny Testaverde led them to the AFC Championship after the 1998 season, and they hoped to take the next step a year later. Then Testaverde, like Rodgers, tore the same tendon in the first game of the season. Testaverde returned the next year, though his numbers showed a marked decline. Moments before Rodgers' debut as a Jet on Monday night, he was joined at midfield by an honorary team captain for the coin toss. It was none other than Testaverde. Mechirismo market guru to rebuild team once again that position have plays isa positive a factoring of potential comeback. New York Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers suffered a season-ending injury during the team's first game. Elsa/Getty Images Sports. Roosevelt and his Justices, The Court at War by Cliff Sloan, Public Affairs, 512 pages, $32. Bookshelf by Barton Swain. School is a hostile environment for boys. If boys were dramatically outperforming girls in school, policymakers would declare a crisis and urgently seek ways to reduce the disparity. In fact, girls are dramatically outperforming boys. Why don't boys get the same respect? In 2014, an American Psychological Association journal published a study that found girls and women, from elementary to graduate school, receive higher grades than males in every subject. The APA looked at research spanning 30 countries and nearly a century, 1914 to 2011. The study reveals that recent claims of a boy crisis, with boys lagging behind girls in school achievement, are not accurate, an APA press release asserted, because girls' grades have been consistently higher than boys. Across several decades with no significant changes in recent years, the opening of opportunity to women, meantime, has created a new disparity. Women account for some 60% of college freshmen. That has broader social implications. Since women tend to marry up, the consequence of this sex ratio imbalance is that educated women have a harder time finding suitable mates, contributing to a decline in marriage, an increase in out-of-wedlock childbearing, and an effort to put a happy face on the latter by women declaring themselves single mothers by choice. Why do boys struggle in school? A 2015 study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology suggested that the current school environment or climate might be in general more attuned to feminine-typed personalities. This is consistent with my clinical observations as a psychotherapist. From preschool, children are asked to sit quietly for long periods of time. That is developmentally unnatural for boys, who have far more testosterone than girls. When boys are asked to suppress their energy and aggression rather than sublimate it into healthy activity, they develop high levels of cortisol, popularly known as the stress hormone. That sends them into fight or flight mode, which makes them distractible, agitated and squirmy. These behaviors can resemble the symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it's likely many boys are misdiagnosed and medicated. Another consequence of feminizing boys is low self-esteem. Boys feel ashamed and are made to feel like failures because of their inability to adapt to feminine teaching methods. They become depressed and anxious, developing feelings of inadequacy and hopelessness. Many are marginalized and openly criticized by teachers, who fail to understand that the problem isn't the boy but the way they're educating him. Liz Comisar is a psychoanalyst and author of Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters and Chicken Little The Sky Isn't Falling. Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. By Erica Comisar. Teaching methods are better suited for girls, who've gotten better grades for a century. Opinion. Franklin Roosevelt needed a new running mate for his fourth presidential election, in 1944. He agreed with Democratic Party leaders that his oddball vice president, Henry Wallace, had become a liability. In the end he chose Missouri Senator Harry Truman, but he came very close to picking one of the justices he had appointed to the Supreme Court, William O. Douglas, who badly wanted the job. Douglas regularly attended the president's poker parties and made dry martinis that FDR particularly liked. The strangest thing about the Douglas Furby episode, so we gather from The Court at War, Cliff Sloan's History of the Supreme Court from about 1939 to 1945, is that hardly anybody at the time thought it strange. The chumminess between the president and his justices was, in one way, to be expected. By 1943 FDR had appointed 7 of the court's 9 justices: Hugo Black, Stanley Reed, Felix Frankfurter, Frank Murphy, Robert Jackson, Wiley Rutledge, and Douglas himself. Harlan Stone had been appointed by Calvin Coolidge, but FDR made him Chief Justice. Only Owen Roberts, a Hoover appointee, didn't give the job to Roosevelt. Even so, it's reasonable to conclude from Mr. Sloan's account of the Roosevelt court that America's mid-century political class wasn't all that interested in the separation of powers. You could guess as much from the fact that Roosevelt's attempt in 1937 to add justices to the court, or pack it with sympathetic justices, nearly succeeded. And R. Sloan reminds us that Justice Black, whom one might have expected to regard court packing an improper infringement on the judiciary by the executive, openly advocated it. Justice Jackson, who frequently accompanied the president on sailing cruises, publicly argued that Roosevelt should run for a 3rd term in 1940. James Burns, whom FDR appointed to the court in 1941 but who soon resigned to run the Office of War Mobilization, didn't let his status as an Associate Justice deter him from assisting the White House with legislation. Justice Frankfurter sent the president, as Mr. Sloan puts it, a steady stream of often oleaginous telegrams and letters in which, among other things, he praised FDR's State of the Union address, praised his policy statements, advised him on labor affairs and recommended appointments. Some of these improprieties doubtless arose from a commendable sense of wartime solidarity. Reading The Court at War, though, you wonder if anybody in the Washington of the 1940s thought much about constitutional principles other than the ones they liked. In 1942 Justice Murphy enlisted in the Army and served as an infantry officer at Fort Benning while remaining on the court. The few critics of this arrangement seem not to have noted the oddity of a justice formally subordinating himself to the commander-in-chief. Only when Justice Murphy showed up in his military uniform to hear a case about the legal status of captured Nazi saboteurs did someone Justice Frankfurter raise an objection. The most striking detail of this particular story: the saboteurs had been captured on U.S. soil and so were not ordinary prisoners of war, is the message sent by FDR to Chief Justice Stone. The president would have the saboteurs shot whatever the court decided. That would be a dreadful thing, is the Chief Justice's rather neat reply. In the end, 6 of them were executed by Sparky, Washington's electric chair. The president's threat almost certainly affected the outcome. Mr. Sloan, a professor of constitutional law at Georgetown, offers a balanced assessment of the wartime court. Korematsu Bu.S. The 1944 decision upholding the forcible detention of Japanese Americans he rightly calls a historic and shameful failure by the best and brightest of the American legal establishment. Conversely, he extols West Virginia v. Barnett, in which the court ruled that laws compelling school children to salute the American flag violate the First Amendment, is among the court's greatest, most eloquent, and most inspiring opinions on free speech and individual rights. Justice Jackson wrote in Barnett that if there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. I find fewer reasons to admire the Roosevelt court than Mr. Sloan does. Its opinions, even the ones it got right, are often gassy and pretentious. In that Barnett opinion, for example, Justice Jackson's reasoning is straightforward. Forcing people to speak oaths against their will violates the First Amendment as applied to states by the 14th. All that business about a fixed star in our constitutional constellation, whatever that is, and officials never being permitted to prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics.